Hello, good morning everyone. We're going to get started now. We would like to give a very warm welcome to our CEO sponsor community and all of our guests that we have on the line this morning. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, How to Measure, Reward, and Foster a Culture of Innovation, with our affiliated research scientist, Soren Kaplan. And before I hand it over to him, we'll do just a few housekeeping items. First, everyone who has called in, lines are muted. If you do want to ask a question verbally through the session, you're welcome to raise your hand, as you see noted here, and I'm happy to unmute you to ask a question, and then if you'll please just lower your hand when you're finished so we know that you're done with your question, that would be great. You're also very welcome to ask a question in the chat box. Please send it to everyone so we can see it. And if you send it just to me, I'll share it back so that Soren can see it. We are recording this webinar. We will send all participants a PDF of the recording and a slide deck later on this week, so everyone will have access to this deck. Now I would like to introduce Soren Kaplan, who is our presenter today. Soren is the author of 2 best-selling and award-winning books, Leapfrogging and The Invisible Advantage. He is a former corporate executive, also an affiliated researcher and professor at the Center for Effective Organizations, as well as the founder of Innovation Point. He is based in Silicon Valley, and he is often delivering keynote speeches, leadership development, and consulting on business and strategy on innovation throughout the world. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Soren to get us going.
Great. Thanks, Martina. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. I'm going to dive right in and just connect to the fact that there are so many innovation books, articles, blogs, research papers. We're inundated with innovation. And that's where I've spent the last 20 years of my career running the internal strategy and innovation function, consulting function at Hewlett-Packard in Silicon Valley. I've worked with large companies, Disney, Colgate, Visa, Medtronic, focused on growth and innovation. And what I'm going to share with you today is going to try to kind of demystify a lot of the dimensions of thinking about how do you create an innovation culture, but specifically focused on rewards, recognition, metrics, and a couple other tidbits for you as well. As we go through this, I would encourage you, we can make this as much of a dialogue as you want to. Go ahead and submit any comments or questions in the chat box, and we can go through that. I'm going to just kind of keep us moving by saying, you know, we have so much information about innovation. You'd think we kind of have it right, but then you look at, you know, the casualties of disruptive innovation recently, whether it's Borders, which had 10% of all books running through that channel just about 5 or 6 years ago, out of business, bankrupt. Blockbuster, think about how many of you had Blockbuster cards in your wallets 10 years ago. Encyclopedia Britannica, my 16-year-old doesn't even know what it is. She uses Wikipedia now. And then, of course, BlackBerry, still alive, but struggling. You know, you look at the dynamics out there. We have, you know, such an awareness of the importance of innovation. We've seen the casualties of disruptive innovation. And now what I want you to do is just enter into the chat box, you know, what do those companies have in common? The companies I just shared with you, Borders, Blockbuster, BlackBerry, Encyclopedia Britannica. Think about that. Enter in the number in the chat box. Let's see how many of you get this right. You know, did these companies ignore disruptive technology? Did they remain tied to their old business model? Did they change fast enough? You know, which of these do you think are true? And it could also be all of the above. And some of the answers are coming in. Some of them are coming in privately. Some of them are coming in to the whole group, perhaps. It's not rocket science. I think if you think about the answer, it's number 4. It's all the above. There's so much happening out there that we can't ignore disruptive technology. We can't remain tied to the old business model. We have to change fast enough. And you look at the dynamics of these companies that have gone bankrupt or gone out of business and they were name brand organizations. Borders, Blockbuster, BlackBerry. There's actually a secret message with all this. Never start a company with the letter B is the joke I like to say, but there's no research behind that. But I am going to share with you some other research that's been done. So when you look at the historical turnover of the S&P 500, I think that there's a little bit of background noise, Martina. Maybe you can see that.
I'm going to take you off my speaker. Maybe that's better. So if you look at the historical turnover of the S&P 500, hey, Martina, there's an echo in the background, so maybe we need to mute some of the lines. Maybe just take a look at that. So in 1965, the duration of a company on the S&P 500 was 33 years. In 1990, it was 20 years. If you extrapolate from 1990 to today and then to 2027, about 10 years from today, 50% of the S&P 500 will be replaced. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will all go the way of Borders and Blockbuster, but it does mean that there are new entrants coming in that might grow and replace the S&P 500. So that's the reality today. Things are moving so fast. Disruptive innovation is happening all around us. And if you look at some of the secrets of some of the most innovative companies in the world, here's what Apple says. There's no formula. If there was a formula, a lot of companies would have bought their ability to innovate, which basically is suggesting that innovation is not necessarily about processes. It's not necessarily only about structure. There's a deeper notion of innovation being kind of a intangible process and approach here. So if Apple's saying that there's no formula, how do we even think about innovating ourselves? So the book that recently came out that this webinar is based upon is called The Invisible Advantage. And really the three fundamental premises here is that competitive advantage today is temporary. Competitive advantage comes and goes, whether you've got product, service, business models, or technology, they will become obsolete one day. How fast is, to be determined, but at some point, everything goes by the way of disruption. Culture is today's only competitive advantage, and it's probably even a semi-competitive advantage. And that the challenge is every organization's culture is unique. So how do you apply, quote unquote, best practices to your own culture? It's not a rubber stamp. It's kind of hard. And so, that's there are best principles and practices we can apply, but you can't just copy one culture over to another. And so those are the principles here. And I'm going to share a number of different frameworks and tools and best practices that we can kind of consider in terms of how we might adapt to what is being done out there. Now, the premise here, innovation culture is the only semi-sustainable competitive advantage. And my view is we need to focus on our innovation cultures and focus on a number of different dimensions to drive innovation on a sustainable basis. And that's where a simple model comes into play. There's a lot of models out there. What I've tried to do is look at the levers that need to be in place that really drive a culture of innovation. Culture of innovation basically meaning the norms and assumptions and values that shape behavior toward innovation. And so I'm going to go through a few of these areas today. I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive in terms of rewards and recognition as well as metrics. As I go through this, feel free to type in a question or a comment. I'm also going to focus on the center of this model as well, the innovation intent. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a bonus a fourth area to consider as you think about your own innovation culture. So we're going to kind of dive in here. So strategy number one, be intentional with your innovation intent. So what does that mean? That basically means that you want to focus on your own unique definition of innovation and how you inspire different types of innovation across the organization so that everybody sees innovation as their role if you're creating a culture of innovation. Now, that definition might look different depending on who you're talking to in the organization, but here's some examples. So if you look at Intuit, which is in the Silicon Valley, they are a software company focused on financial software. Their mission is essentially an innovation intent, which basically has their focuses on their customers to improve our customers' financial lives so profoundly they can't imagine going back to the old way. So what they're basically saying is everyone in the organization, their job is to improve their customers' financial lives. And they do that in a number of different ways. I'm going to share with you how they think about focusing in on kind of recognition in a second, but I also want to share a different innovation intent, and this is from KQED. So, you know, Intuit, publicly traded company, KQED is actually a public radio, you know, they're public radio and media and television in the San Francisco Bay Area. Had a chance to work with their executive team, and their definition of innovation, very different. It's pretty simple. On the left-hand side, they created this definition to get everybody aligned around the idea that they want to, quote-unquote, do the right thing for their audience, the community, because they were focused on their nonprofit organization, focused on the community, supporters, their staff, and their organization by continually assessing, prioritizing, and improving what they do. It's not necessarily about disruptive innovation. It's not necessarily about kind of reinventing the media landscape, but it is about improvement. And what they focus on is their operating principles, and you can see they defined a number of different operating principles that basically dimensionalize what they mean by innovation. So I'm not going to read these, but the idea is that this organization wanted everyone to do a number of things around continuous improvement as they were defining innovation. And that's their innovation intent. So everyone knows that these are the things they care about. So if you look at different models of innovation, the example of KQED, it's mostly incremental innovation. There's small changes that they want to make sure that every employee is really focused on continuous improvement. But leadership teams in many organizations, if you're really creating a culture of innovation, leadership teams need to understand what their portfolio looks like. And that portfolio can range from a couple different areas, from the type of innovation, from incremental to the evolutionary stuff that kind of takes what you're doing to the next generation of it, or to the disruptive stuff that might fully cannibalize your whole business model or create whole new white space opportunities. And so looks like the slide got a little tweaked, but basically incremental above it should say 70%, evolutionary 20%, 10% disruptive. Those numbers are flexible. Every organization should have their own view of the portfolio. These came from Google. But the idea is that you want a portfolio view and have everyone understanding what this means to them. And then at the bottom, the other notion is that innovation can mean different things to different business functions and business units even. And it can be about new products, new services, new processes, or new business models. And so aligning the organization around your innovation intent is the first step in really thinking about how to create a culture of innovation. So I'm gonna move on to the more specifics about rewards and recognition at this point. And we're gonna zero in on rewards and recognition, and we're gonna zero in on metrics. So those are the areas that we're gonna focus on in more detail now. And I'm going to dive in with strategy number 2. So give worthless rewards. And I have worthless in quotes because the whole notion here is that worthless rewards, things that without financial value, are actually the most meaningful rewards when it comes to shaping innovation culture. And what I mean by that is if you look at what Intuit does, Intuit is probably one of the most well-known bigger companies in Silicon Valley focused on innovation and having an innovation culture. One of the things they do is they just simply recognize the innovators each year on their Innovation Wall of Fame. So it's essentially a wall in their corporate office where individuals are profiled who have innovated in some meaningful way in the year. And so they have innovations that people who are profiled, who of course have created products that generate revenue or have supported their growth strategy, but they also celebrate HR. Here's a group that was focused on what they call immersive college recruiting. So they have an innovation process, I'll share it with you in a second, which they use, and they go to college campuses. It's really hard to get talent in Silicon Valley. So what they do is they go to college campuses, and instead of doing interviews, what they do is they do an innovation jam, essentially, where they invite a bunch of college students, and they have a number of their employees, and they actually solve real problems for Intuit in an innovation session. So they can see how the students are performing. The students can see how cool they are as a company because it's not a traditional interview. And then they offer internships and even jobs to these college students. So this is a differentiator when it comes to recruiting, and this was celebrated and recognized as an innovation. An equal innovation on the wall as compared to even a product innovation. So what they're trying to do is demonstrate innovation can come from anywhere and look like a lot of different things. And they're trying to get the best talent so they can transform their customers' financial lives, which is their mission statement. They also have, you can see at the very background of this slide, the posters there. This is something else that they've innovated that won one of the awards. It's called the Techno Bar. This Techno Bar basically is kind of a way to get tech support. So if you're in a big company and you need help with your computer, it can take a while to get tech support. And what they've done is their IT department basically created something like the Genius Bar that Apple has, where you just walk up and you get help. And this was one of the awards that they gave as well. So you can see innovation is coming from anywhere and everywhere and being celebrated as well. And the way that they have given all of their employees the ability to innovate is through what they call the Catalyst Toolkit. If you type in Innovation Catalyst Toolkit in Google, you will get this guide. They've made it freely available. It's about 4 or 5 pages, and it walks every employee through the design thinking process. They call it Design for Delight, and it starts with customer empathy. And customers can be internal customers as well as external. And then go broad to go narrow means brainstorming and prioritization. And then rapid experiments with customers basically means you're testing your ideas with people internally who are employees that you might be serving as well as external customers. And so they've tied this process to people's goals. They give people time to innovate, and then they celebrate those innovations through that wall of fame. So you can kind of see how the system works here that they're trying to reinforce. I'm going to flip back to KQED, again, the public television, radio, and media station. What they've done essentially is tied a trophy to their brand. So KQED, the Q is kind of an icon for them. And so they've created the trophy called the Q Trophy. They've created a team called the Qvation team, which is like innovation, but they tied a Q to it. The Qvation team identifies those individuals. These are the innovation principles I shared with you before at the bottom here. Those individuals who have embodied, from an innovation standpoint, the innovation principles, and they give this trophy away about quarterly to those individuals. And that trophy then sits on people's desks and becomes kind of the anchor point for stories that people tell about why they got the award and what they did. And then they kind of publish the story on their website, in their intranet site, and kind of celebrate those success stories tied to their innovation intent. So this is an interesting, kind of worthless reward, I guess you could say. It's not financial, yet it connects back to the brand, and it really reinforces the values that they're trying, the behavior they're trying to reinforce there. So that's the worthless reward from a formal standpoint. Here's an informal reward, which I think is really fascinating in terms of how it plays out. I've done some work with the Global Technology Group at Colgate. There's about 1,000 people in this organization. They're in Piscataway, New Jersey, and a couple research scientists there worked on a project and had a team supporting their project, and it was a cross-functional team. They really had to kind of bust silos and collaborate in new ways. And at the end of the project, these two research scientists had gotten a hold of a number of wooden nickels, and wooden nickels kind of an icon for something that's literally worthless in terms of financial value. And as kind of a fun kind of joke, they started doling out some wooden nickels as thank yous to people. They didn't have a budget to give out real money or gift cards, so they gave a bunch of wooden nickels out there, and people took them and thought they were fun. And then in future projects, when someone who had received those wooden nickels had others who would contribute to their own work, they would give them wooden nickels. They'd kind of pass them back, kind of give them back to other people. And then people started buying wooden nickels online. You can get them on Amazon, and handing them out in their own meetings. And you might even come back to your desk and find some wooden nickels sitting on your desk as a thank you for collaborating. So this became what I call a recognition economy, where people are supporting each other and fostering kind of the value of collaborative innovation using a truly worthless icon or a symbol, but it works. And it's really about kind of that authentic appreciation, and the wooden nickel just became a symbol of that to reinforce the values. So, organizations can potentially, create the same kind of recognition economy, but it really needs to come from an authentic place. And that's really where Colgate kind of success with this came into play. So those are the worthless rewards, and the rewards and examples of rewards and recognition. I'm going to shift gears now to metrics. So when you think about metrics, a lot of organizations have metrics. A lot of organizations have growth metrics. What I'm going to focus on here is this whole notion that metrics are really about measuring what's meaningful. And understanding what's meaningful from an innovation lens is really what we're talking about. When you want to create a culture of innovation, it's really about focusing in on what's important to measure that fosters the kind of behavior, values and behavior you're looking for. So anybody know who this is? Type into the chat box if you know who this gentleman is here. I'm not seeing anything coming in. Maybe I'll have you guys stumped. There you go. That's from Margaret and Bruce. You guys nailed it. Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker, probably one of the most celebrated, published management thinkers ever. He basically is saying what's measured improves. So if you decide to measure something, people realize it's important. People really get motivated around it. People, kind of focus on it, and it gets attention. Things that get attention typically improve, and that's kind of his premise there. So the question is, how do you give innovation the kind of attention that you want? Well, it's interesting because 70%. I think it's a McKinsey study. 70% of leaders basically are saying innovation is a top 3 priority. So yes, it's important. You can state it's important. However, 22% of global companies basically have innovation metrics. So these are metrics specifically focused on the innovation process, as well as fostering a culture of innovation. So there's a big gap and a big disconnect between the innovation metrics that exist between, in terms of what companies are hoping to achieve, and then actually putting metrics in place so that the innovation actually improves, per Peter Drucker. So what that suggests is that you need to create some specific innovation metrics to drive innovation. And so there's some examples here that are pretty simple. If you think about Yum Brands and Kentucky Fried Chicken, a number of years, they have a number of brands, but Yum basically 10, 12 years ago, maybe a little longer now, basically recognized that domestic growth in the United States, where they're based, was going to, had basically leveled out. And they needed growth from other places. They either needed to, create a new brand, they needed to buy, kind of acquisitions, or they needed to expand and increase revenue some other way. So they decided to focus on China, and they decided to create an innovation metric that basically said that they wanted to increase the proportion of international revenue over domestic revenue, and create a disproportionate amount of international revenue. So what they did is they went into China, and if you're selling Kentucky Fried Chicken, you can't really just go into China and sell Kentucky Fried Chicken and biscuits and coleslaw. You have to adapt to the local culture. And so what they were forced to essentially do is introduce their brand but innovate their menu. And they created a whole menu around, in China, street food is really popular, kind of, I'm going to not pronounce it right, but it's something like yaptayo. And basically it's street, kind of emulating the kind of street food you might find out there from a Kentucky Fried Chicken lens, I guess. And what happened was, as they innovated, it really caught on. And international sales and profits from sales went up from 20% to 70%. So they completely flipped their revenue model. And that's because they put a target out there. So that target wasn't just about, we want more profit. It was about profit from international in a disproportionate way. So that's a metric example. There's other examples where it's much more focused on the innovation process itself. P&G, this is a classic example of open innovation. P&G has a group within their R&D organization called Connect and Develop, and you can go to their website. It's a pretty interesting website that kind of sources ideas from around the world. They also have a number of scouts. And what they basically recognized early on, they were one of the first to do open innovation. There's a great HBR article focused on what they've done. But basically, they recognize that not all the smart people are actually working within P&G. There's a lot of opportunity to go outside. And so what they did is they set a metric. And they basically said that they wanted to dramatically increase the ideas and technology coming from outside the organization. And that was their goal. And so in 2000, when they looked and they did a portfolio analysis, they basically said, we're getting about 10% of all technology and products coming out of, coming from outside. And so as they created their Connect and Develop strategy, within 15 years or so, it was actually less. They achieved 50% of all external technology, or all technology coming from outside the organization. And they've created products, some of their blockbuster products like this Magic Eraser and Febreze and Tide Pods. The core technologies from those products are coming from outside sourced ideas because of their open innovation model that they've created. So they set a metric around wanting to bring in outside ideas. Now that's not a financial metric. It's really a metric to say this is an input to the innovation process. So it's an input, but they're looking at that input as a driver of innovation, as a driver of revenue. So it's not that end output metric, it's an input metric. And so that's another way to look at your innovation metrics, as the kind of things you can measure that will drive the innovation process. Here's another example, and it's a little bit hard to see the background here, but basically this is overlaid on a big in a big warehouse, and this company is called Space Saver, and their metric is actually quite different from the ones I just shared with you, because metrics can be very qualitative too. So Space Saver is a big industrial manufacturing organization. They're the leader in creating storage, they call them storage solutions. Basically, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen here, gun racks for the military and police departments around the U.S., or library shelves. So these are the library shelving at the bottom left there. And what you see at the top right with the circle around it is a big poster. And this poster is basically an example of a installation of their big storage racks. And from a metric standpoint, what they want to be able to do is they want to communicate to every employee the value that they're providing to the world. It's a very simple way they look at it. And what you see here is, these people are sitting in the middle of Wisconsin in a manufacturing facility, but this poster is showing how their solution, their big metal storage rack, is housing dinosaur bones and artifacts at the Field Museum in Chicago so that the world can appreciate and enjoy the natural history of our Earth. So what they're doing is they're creating a line of sight to the value they're creating in the world for every employee. And that's extremely important to this organization so that people even who are isolated, so to speak, from real customers and kind of they're seeing the solutions in the market, understand what the value is that they're creating each and every day. Now, in the same warehouse, there's a gong. And this is the manufacturing manager at Space Saver. And this gong, basically, another kind of very soft metric, when someone does something innovative in terms of changing a process or achieving some kind of output that they've been focused on, they bang the gong really loud so that the entire facility can hear it. And it's as simple as that. But it's a metric to say, if something good happens around innovation, they're going to bang the gong. And it's become kind of this ritual where they can understand that something good happened and they can understand what it is and they can celebrate it. And it's a very simple way. You could call it reward and recognition also, but it really is a way to kind of measure the good things happening the more the gong is hit. So just another way to look at a metric. Now, there are a number of different ways to define metrics. I'm going to share with you a number of items here that I'm not going to read to you, but basically I'll kind of outline how they work. And they're in my book, and there are a number of other articles that we can make available to you. But basically, when you think about metrics for innovation and to drive culture, I look at 4 types of metrics, and really being able to keep it simple. You want maybe 2 or 3 at the most, maybe 4, one from each of these. A lot of organizations already have revenue as a metric, revenue and profit in some way, but you can fine-tune these to support innovation. So revenue, from the standpoint of innovation, you might measure the revenue from new products or services introduced in the past X years. So whatever whatever the time frame is, you can create a rolling average and measure revenue or profit from those new products. Now, you have to be careful, because with some of the big disruptive innovations, it can take a long time to realize revenue. So sometimes, you need to be able to understand what kind of innovation you're actually going to measure. But from a revenue standpoint, there are definitely things that can help kind of create that output metric that you want. Now, the rest of these outside of revenue are really some of the input metrics that can help drive innovation. And those input metrics can include things around leadership, employees, or customers. From a standpoint of leadership, being able to have leadership take a portfolio view, just like the innovation intent model, and be able to define the kind of funding they want to give to the incremental, the sustaining innovation or evolutionary innovation, and then the disruptive stuff. So that's a way to look at it, or even the amount of time leaders are spending driving innovation or sitting on an innovation council or board. Those are other metrics that you can look at. Employees, there's a number of organizations that focus on GE has really promoted patents by employees. There's other ways in which you can just basically say ideas submitted through some of these platforms like Spigot or Bright Idea are ways in which to collect ideas from the employee base, and looking at number of ideas that are submitted or number of the ideas that are actually turned into experiments, for example, or even funded ideas from employees. So you can look at various things for employees. You can look at, going back to the Intuit example, the number of teams that submit projects to innovation awards. And then on the customer side, a lot of organizations struggle to engage the customer in the innovation process, but that's really where the future is in terms of principles like lean startup and rapid iteration and design thinking. Having customers engaged in the innovation process is a real success factor. So some organizations are starting to look at customers as a driver of the innovation process in terms of the metrics being used. So number of projects that involve customers in the front end of the innovation process, customers that even help test and refine ideas. Going back to Intuit, they have something called customer roundtables, where basically they're called office hours. That's what it's called, customer office hours. And office hours are essentially a time every month where customers come in, they get a bunch of customers, a little panel of them, and they just come into a room, and they are there to provide input on ideas. And it's as simple as that. So they're giving employees the ability to just come in and see customers, hear about their pain points, and test ideas. So there's a number of different ways in which you can use these metrics to drive new processes and new approaches to innovation. So that is the family of metrics that I would call out. And there are a lot of different ways you can look at metrics, but these are some of the ways. And there's also another one that I would want to I'll call out, and I call it a throughput metric. A throughput metric is basically how fast you can do some of these things that are on this screen. So how fast you can run through the front end of the innovation process, or how fast you can test an idea. So there's other companies that are starting to look at throughput metrics instead of just the inputs and the outputs, really looking at the process within the organization and how fast you can go, because speed these days is really a source of competitive advantage. And if you have a culture that has speed, then you start to build out your muscle memory around a culture of innovation. Okay, so those are the rewards and metrics that I wanted to focus on, and I'm going to give you a bonus strategy number 4 in a second. But if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them in to the chat, and we've left some solid room at the end just for a conversation if there's any questions or comments that you'd like me to answer or respond to. So bonus strategy number 4. Rewrite the unwritten rules. So I'm going to share with you just a simple way to look at innovation culture. There's a number of different dimensions that I've shared with you. I focused on 2 of them, but essentially what we're trying to do, and here's a simple model to think about culture, is we all have experiences, and we have experiences in life, and we have experiences in our organizations. And I think a lot of times there's this kind of false line between the kinds of things that we have in normal life and daily life versus what happens in our organizations. But the essence of it is culture shapes, whether it's culture of the countries, the geographies we live in, or our organizations, by the experiences that we have. And I'll bring this to life in a moment. Experiences lead to the assumptions that we have about what's good behavior, what's bad behavior, what's acceptable behavior, what's rewarded behavior. Those assumptions then drive behavior, because we have assumptions about what's the right kind of behavior to have, and so we do things that support those assumptions. And if we, in life, if we deviate from those, then there's usually consequences. Those behaviors then are observable behaviors from everyone around us. And then those behaviors become experiences that we see. And those experiences, because they are based on behaviors rooted in assumptions, start to reinforce the assumptions. And it's a feedback loop. Simple feedback loop. Experiences drive assumptions. Assumptions drive behavior. And those experiences can either support innovation or hinder innovation. So the simple example, I'll just use a personal example. When I was a little kid, I was walking to school. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And that's when you could walk to school at that age. And I got knocked down by 2 big German shepherds. I didn't get bit, but they knocked me down. I think they were probably wanting to play, but it scared the daylights out of me. So for years, I had this assumption that dogs were dangerous. And when I see a dog, I kind of run away. And so my behavior was to kind of cower when I saw a dog. Now I got over that. But the same kind of experiences, if you're giving away wooden nickels, or if you're giving an innovation trophy away, you give people experiences, you start telling stories about it. Those stories, like at KQED, were anchored in 5 innovation principles that they cared about. So you're giving the entire employee population, they see the trophy, they hear the stories, they hear stories that are anchored in the values and assumptions that the organization thinks are important. They see the behavior of receiving the trophy. They see the behavior of what people did to drive that innovation that resulted in the trophy. That creates new experiences, and it reinforces the feedback loop in terms of culture. So those are the dynamics that typically you can see in many organizations. A lot of times those experiences, when they are tied to things like leadership saying they want innovation, but then not funding it or not giving people rewards for it or not talking about it, instead talking about the quarterly results they have to drive and not really promoting innovation, those experiences can lead to assumptions that, well, we really don't want innovation. And then that drives behavior that you don't get the kind of new product, service, business model process that you really want. So experiences is really what it's all about. And metrics, rewards, metrics, rewards, and recognition are the ways and key ways in which you can drive some of those experiences. So I'm going to leave you with a tool, and we can make this tool available to all of you. It's called the Invisible Advantage Map. And basically, it includes all of the different levers that can be pulled to drive a culture of innovation and new types of experiences. It's a little hard to probably read on your screen right now, but basically it has the 7 dimensions of innovation culture. And then on the right-hand side, it has examples of things you could do that are really kind of the best principles and practices. You don't want to do them all. It's really about choosing a couple of those things that for each of these areas that really will reinforce that area, and that you'll create a kind of systemic view of this map for your organization. Every culture is different. Every organization should have their own map. So we'll make that available for anyone who wants it following our webinar. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up. There is a link here. There's a toolkit that you can get related to the book. That toolkit includes the map. It includes a PowerPoint template, a number of other things. So if you have the book already, you can just send an email to that link, email on the page, and you'll get a link to the toolkit, and it's freely available. So I'm going to wrap here. Martina, maybe you can let us know if any questions have come in, or if there's anything else, any questions you have that you think I could address in the last few minutes that we have.
Absolutely. Thanks, Soren. Well, let's go on just to the next slide if you want to talk about your program briefly. And if folks want to type in questions or raise your hand to ask a question, now's a great time.
Great. Thanks. So let me just give you an overview of what's coming up. The CEO has done a great job in coordinating with 3M a session called Demystifying Innovation, how to create a culture of innovation that drives business growth. And basically what this 2-day session is it's an awesome opportunity to go and visit. We'll have a visit of the 3M Innovation Center. 3M, as you know, has been kind of an icon in innovation for many, many years. They were one of the first companies to provide free time to employees just to tinker and innovate. And they have a long history of innovation, so and innovation culture. So it'll be May 23rd, 24th, 25, and basically we will be, I'll be going through the whole model. I'll be sharing best practices, examples from many, many different companies. We'll have a couple speakers. Not only will we get to experience 3M's Innovation Center and get a tour, we're going to have David Underwood, who's the head of innovation for AAA Insurance. AAA Insurance out here in California the insurance industry is going through true disruption right now. It's really on the front end of being dramatically changed with self-driving cars and others. So we're going to get to see firsthand and hear firsthand from someone who's kind of leading innovation in an industry as well as a company that is going through disruption really on the front end of that. So they've been doing an amazing job at connecting together a number of the different dimensions on that invisible advantage map. So we'll get to hear from David. He'll be there the whole time. He'll be providing input into the model as we go through it. He's a great guy. And you'll be walking away, all the participants walk away with a number of different frameworks and models and tools, so that there's even a diagnostic. It's part of the book. There's a survey as well as an interview guide so that anyone can use to kind of decipher their innovation culture and then define their invisible advantage map. So it'll be a working session. There'll be a lot of best practices, and you kind of get to practice with some of these tools as well. So that is what's coming down the pipe in May. And let me just pause there. Martina, any other comments about the program or any other questions that you've got?
That is great. There's a couple questions coming in. I will read the first one from Judith. How does this difference from balanced scorecard?
Yeah, great question. So, there's a lot of these models. There's a lot of overlap between how you think about the dimensions that make a successful organization. The way I look at it is culture is this, I call it the invisible advantage, because culture is invisible typically. And yes, I shared some things today that are similar to balanced scorecard. There's some different similar dimensions to it. But what this is it's a lens. It's a lens to understand innovation culture is really about the underlying norms and values that exist in your culture that most people have a hard time articulating. Yeah, there might be an innovation award that you give people, but a lot of people would have a hard time really deciphering, well, what is that really reinforcing at a deeper level, at a cultural level? And how does that really reinforce some of the behaviors that we're looking for, and how does it connect to our formal innovation process? How does it connect to our leadership development process? So what we're trying to do with culture is kind of decipher the underlying norms and behaviors and get at the kinds of things that drive innovation specifically tied to the portfolio view that I shared, the incremental to the disruptive stuff. So balanced scorecard is a bit broader. This is really zeroing in on kind of the innovation lens, if you will, for organizations.
Great. We have a question from John who asked, do you ever make a distinction between innovation and adaptation?
I'm going to have to interpret what he means by adaptation, but basically, if the world's changing around you, how do you adapt and change to it, or how do you adapt and drive change proactively? From a research standpoint, you could argue that there's a lot of similarity between change and innovation. The innovation literature is pretty distinct when it looks at new product, new service, new business model, and new process innovation and innovation culture. But fundamentally, innovation is about change. Adaptation is about change. Innovation, the way I would look at it, though, is it ensures that there's a lens on value creation, so improvement, Adaptation, there's a lot of arguments that change for change's sake isn't necessarily, an anchor point that motivates people. Innovation can provide a motivational lens in which to drive value creation for any business function as well as the organization.
Great. If there's any final questions, you're welcome to raise your hand or type something into the box. We'll give folks just another minute to do that. I will read here, we have a comment from Judith. I'll read it here. It is, I disagree that the wooden nickel is a, quote, worthless reward. Have you ever worked with the U.S. government, and are you familiar with their tokens? Go to any local frame shop in D.C. and you'll see them in a frame, which are usual retirement gifts. Any comment on that, Soren?
Yeah, well, I'm not actually not familiar with the U.S. government and their tokens, but you could, the comment, the worthless in quotes is really kind of a flipped way to say that, it's not about giving someone a big check. And it's not about sending them on a vacation to Hawaii. It's really about giving them something that's symbolic. So the way I read that comment or hear that comment, these things are not worthless by the standard definition. They actually have a lot of meaning for people. They actually have a lot of power. And so, while they might not be financially, maybe if they're made out of gold, they actually have a financial value to them. But, the idea of a worthless reward really is that it has some meaning tied to it. And financial rewards also can have meaning tied to them. I'm not saying that not to consider a financial reward, but, what I've seen in the research and just in my own 20 years of experience working across the Fortune 500 is that the motivational rewards, the greatest ones, have less to do with money and more to do with affiliation, sense of purpose, and kind of the symbol connected back to the brand of the organization so that you kind of feel like you're part of something bigger. And that's really what I meant by worthless. But I'd be curious about those government tokens. I'll have to do a little research into it.
Great. I'll read a question from Eric. He says, does your model differentiate between transformative innovation and incremental innovation?
So the model I shared, the portfolio view, does make that distinction. There's different types of innovations. If you dive deeper, I didn't share it today, but if you dive deeper into the structure and process dimension of culture, there are a number of different models where you can actually look at driving disruptive innovation and more of the kind of step changes that are the evolutionary. And typically you have to separate those out of the core business because usually if you're trying to kind of cannibalize the core business and you're trying to kind of do things that are at odds with the current business model, the antibodies of that organization will spring up and kind of stamp it out. So when you get into structure process, that's really where it comes into play. The kinds of things I shared with you today can be applied to any type of innovation. Typically, organizations are really, when you think about a culture of innovation and the metrics and rewards, they're usually applied to more the incremental continuous improvement areas, as well as maybe the sustaining areas like Kentucky Fried Chicken in the example there. They created a whole new market space, but they're not fundamentally disrupting, chicken. It's very important to understand the difference between incremental and disruptive. And that usually comes into play with how you drive the organizational structure and process part of it.
Great. I'll give you a big picture question from Rachel, who says, where would you start when the CEO says our company needs to be more innovative?
That's great. That's a great question. Well, I like that question because if it can start at the CEO level, that's great. And really it starts with basically saying, what do we mean by innovation? It goes back to, and that's why I included, this was a presentation on metrics and rewards, but I started out with the innovation intent, because it's really about what do we mean by innovation. When I mentioned AAA Insurance, I've worked with their executive team, and that was the starting point for them. They basically said, we know the world's being disrupted, we need to play, and we need innovation. But the question was, well, what do they mean by it? And they actually embraced that portfolio model that I shared. I just wrote about it in Fast Company. So the CEO basically can essentially, if you have an opportunity to work as CEO, what do you mean by innovation? Are we talking about incremental, we're just improving today's business and everybody's doing it? Or are we talking about the disruptive stuff that creates whole new markets or even, cannibalizes what we're currently doing today in terms of a new business model? What are we talking about? From there, then you can, get into, well, what do we need to do to achieve those things? And are we talking about product, service, or business model innovation, or just process innovation? And that then helps to just anchor the conversation. It's the first step. And then, from there, you kind of cascade it out to some of these other dimensions of the model.
Great, and we'll take just one or two more questions. A question from Jean is, can you speak about the relationship between crisis and innovation?
Yeah, burning platforms are great for innovation, although you can also look at some of the historical examples like Blockbuster and others, and they didn't feel things were burning hot enough, I guess. So crisis actually can be a source of innovation, for sure. It can create the motivation and the impetus for it. The challenge sometimes with crisis, though, is that if it's about financial crisis, if it's about pressures, then sometimes innovation can get cut. And, you kind of retrench and focus on what you know, which is the core business, even if it's declining. And there are a lot of, great examples and research around that. So crisis, if you can create a sense of burning platform before it's actually burning or burning too hot, that's really, I think, a way to go. And a burning platform can be motivational as well as kind of fear-based, if you will. I typically like to think about crisis as here's what's happening, here's what could potentially happen that isn't good, and here's what we can do from a kind of an innovation positive lens to preempt that from happening.
Great. Well, I think we will leave it there for today. Thank you, Soren, for a great webinar this morning, and thanks to everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.